Oh, hey, folks are getting set up in the room.
Oh, hey, you're able to get on the microphone. I wasn't sure if you
Oh yeah,
were.
yeah, no, like I'm mic'd, but I'm not that interesting. It's fine.
I wasn't sure how bad you were feeling today, so I wasn't gonna.
No, I mean, I kind of lost my voice over the weekend, and then I was like, maybe I should not go to KubeCon, and so I'm in a screen like I normally am. But yeah, we had a small amount of room conflict, and they're getting set up. So give everybody a bit. Actually, take this opportunity to make the agenda in the Hack MD. Hooray!
That's what I was just doing.
Yeah.
Just in time planning every time.
It just seems to work for this group. It's fine.
We get away with it somehow.
It's fine. It's fine.
I will say that I proposed a little bit of the agenda last time. Said, does this sound good? And everybody just kind of shrugged and was like, yeah, good enough.
No, that actually all seems reasonable. I hope we get enough people to be able to actually do status updates. So, game on.
I figured the image distribution side doesn't talk to the runtime side that much, so it'd be nice just to have us go back and forth and saying, hey, here's the stuff we're doing right now.
Yeah, good use of time. One other note, Brandon, and it doesn't look like it's actually in the agenda. Uh, Josh Dolitsky has asked for a maintainers vote on distribution spec, and that might be part of the status updates, but we'll see.
I put that as the last link in our blockers section.
Oh, great. Okay. Cool. That's exactly what I was looking for. Thank you.
I get the feeling that it will be a little premature, but we'll see what the group comes out with. I think different people think it's premature for completely different reasons, though.
So it'll be a good old knockdown drag out to finish us out. Cool. Okay. We haven't had one of those in a while.
Oh, the knockdown drag down will probably come somewhere in the middle of us discussing all of our blockers. We've got plenty of that.
Hey, this looks like the room is actually joining us.
Ethan did that last time, so he might just have that as his
Oh,
pretty
maybe not.
background for the
Okay,
day.
that is pretty. All right, fine. Hmm. I can tell like the room is actually still getting set up because I checked with Mike Brown.
Yeah, Ethan confused me on our OCI call for the auth working group a couple hours ago. I thought it was the room dialing in.
which would be interesting because we didn't have a room for that one, so we didn't have the fun of being able to wait for them. Okay.
That's why I was really confused to start with. I was like, wait, what's going on?
You hear it?
We think we can hear you. We're not sure. Should we?
I can hear you. Last time we were asking Ethan some questions and he didn't say anything. So I'm guessing Mike is off, or Mike doesn't show muted, but it's not hooked up on his side, or he's being very quiet.
We can do that. So there's a couple mics. I shouldn't have the mic. You should. But there's a couple, so maybe keep it.
We got double. I got here early.
Okay. Oh, is the Zoom up?
No, redirect.
Oh, hello.
Hello.
Can everybody on the call hear us?
We
Yes,
can hear you.
Come on in.
Amy? Amy?
Hi.
Hey,
Yes, okay.
we hear you. We
Here,
don't
Mike.
see you.
I'll turn on, well, here, I'll turn on video even though like the.
Whoop, whoop. So we have about 8 people so far, and
Oh,
they're just
perfect. Okay.
currently setting up the Zoom.
Neat.
These eyes are crying.
Hey, Brandon. Hey, Brandon, how you doing?
Hello, KubeCon.
Already better than mine.
Look at that inception going on there.
Hey, y'all.
Really shouldn't.
Nothing.
I think we should invite a couple people. Maybe we can make this back.
All right, kick it off, Brandon.
It was a talk. They were looking at.
You all ready to kick this thing off already? Finally got the last people out of the room.
Is anyone else here?
All right. On the call, in case people can't see that in the room, we've got myself, Bjorn, Amy, Jeff, Ethan, who I'm assuming is in the room, and Saeed.
We do the little baby pictures. We're trying to switch it to little baby pictures so we can see.
Top right corner, gallery view. I like the gallery view.
This gallery, just 2 of them.
Oh, okay.
Should we go around and start with some introductions? I know that sometimes we get a lot of people here that aren't familiar with others, and so I figure just do a quick round and have folks say who they are.
Okay, not all at once. I'll start. Hi, I'm Amy Scavarta-Perrin. I am your friendly neighborhood program manager here from CNCF, like Linux Foundation side of the house. Good to see all of you. Passing to Michael Brown. There.
Hey, I'm Michael, the one on Zoom, not this mic. I work at AWS. I don't know.
Favorite color.
Was there an introduction? Was there an introduction prompt, Brandon?
No prompt. Just
All right, I'm
tell
Michael
us what
Brown.
you like doing for fun.
I am Josh Dolitsky.
You put the release vote up for candidate for. Just before the meeting.
Yes, I'm Kohei from NTT. Nice meeting you.
I am Akihiro from NTT in Japan as well, and I'm a main engineer of Runtime Spec and RunC.
I'm Jesse Butler. I'm with AWS and work in Kubernetes and ECR.
Hi, Mike Brown. Been a while for a while. Work on OCI stuff, distribution spec, containerd.
I'm Derek. I recently rejoined Docker. Actually, I've been working on containerd and I guess some registry stuff for a while.
Phil Estes, work at AWS, mostly focused on containerd as a maintainer, and been around the OCI for a while and never been Maintainer on any spec. I've never been a maintainer. I've only been on the TOB. That's why I'm useless in the OCI.
I think it's time to nominate a new maintainer. Is that the whole room? Or are we still going?
That's the whole room.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
that's the whole room. So the rest
Okay.
of the online.
So now,
people.
now from the rest of the online, I'm Brandon. I am recently retired, but still hanging out doing OCI stuff and everything containers and open source. Let me pass it over to Jeff.
Jeff Carter, here at Docker, working on the Docker registry and auth spec stuff.
I can go next.
Saeed.
So I'm Saeed from Red Hat. I am the technical lead for Koi.io.
Okay, Bjorn, did you go?
No, I am Bjorn Jurgard. I'm currently an employee of Docker, and I am a maintainer of Moby and drive-by contributor to other projects up and down the container stack.
Did we miss anybody? All right. Welcome, everybody. I feel bad trying to run this when I'm not in the room itself. So if folks in the room want to take control of the reins, feel free to. I figure it'd be good to get a quick status of what's been happening in a couple of the specs. So I think we've got a few runtime maintainers in here just to give us an update. I know there was been some releases coming out in this past year. And so just to say what's been happening over on the runtime side.
He's asked for a summary of what's been going on. So let's see.
Yeah, so in July, we released runtime spec version 1.1 with formal support for C group version 2 and ID maps. But it's the ID map was still incomplete in the spec version 1.1, and there's a PR target for spec 1.1.1. 1.1.1. And Giuseppe is writing on that PR to fix up ID maps, and I think we can merge the PR and release version 1.1.1. Sorry, 1.1.2. Sorry, 1.1.1 soon, and after that, we have to release Runcy version 1.2. to support the runtime spec version 1.1. And I think we can work on that by the end of the year, just along with Control-D version 2. But maybe we have to delay releasing Runcy version 1.2 for a couple of months, or maybe.
And are there any big noteworthy things in those releases for us to be familiar with, especially between the specs? And so anything image spec and distribution spec should be considering when the runtime is doing some of these latest releases.
There's no specific call out. Is there anything in the runtime spec work that you're doing that you want to call out for image?
Pass the mic.
Our mostly runtime spec is decoupled from our image spec. Yeah, but Alexa, maybe Alexa is not changing today, but there is a discussion on how to propagate image labels to runtime annotations. Yeah, so yeah, I don't think we have to modify the image spec from our side. Yeah, yeah, probably, yeah.
Those probably just always get me nervous. I feel like there's going to be something coming up later on, but very happy to hear there's good progress being made. Does anybody want to take the image spec to talk about what we've been doing over there? Have y'all been worn out already on the first day? All right, I guess I can do a quick rundown on the image spec and distribution. On image spec this past year, we've been going back and forth trying to get some RCs out. And I think the biggest change over there has been extending it for artifact support to make the image spec itself a generic artifact manifest, and then supporting the subject field on there. And so that the subject field then bleeds over into distribution spec, which is why the two of those have been going very closely together, where the refers API is a method to report back different manifests that have that subject field set on it. So between the two of those, we can upload an image, we can upload a bunch of metadata on the image, and then query that metadata using the refers API. Does that summarize it shortly and briefly enough for those there? People want to expand on that? Or do we just want to jump into more of the meat of the discussion?
I think if you're here, you know. I think if you're here, you know.
Sound good? Okay, I'll give a quick update of the auth working group, and I don't think we have anybody representing image compatibility today. But anybody that wants to interject, feel free to interject on this stuff. In the auth working group, we have been going through looking at various client implementations of how clients are authenticating to a registry. So we've been looking at Moby, we've been looking at ORAS, and just a little earlier today, we looked at Reg Client. We've got on our to-do list to look at Containerd as well. So that in summary, we kind of combine all the different implementations as saying things to be aware of, different processes clients have had to implement over the time. And soon we're going to go into what different RFCs are out there that we can work with, like OIDC and different stuff that's already standardized, so we don't have to repeat standards if things are already out there in public. And then also looking at some of the harder problems. So a lot of the stuff in auth is focused on you pull an image, you push an image, looking at more complicated things of cross-repository blob mounts when you have authentication, or what tokens do you need for those? If you initially pull an image and then later go to push an image to the same repo with the same token, what's the workflow there to make sure that you get an updated token if you need it? There are a lot of different more edgy cases like that we need to work through. And so we want to start documenting a bunch of those and then start working on how do we solve the auth challenge overall, finally. In the image compatibility, that working group has just been spun up. So approved by the TOB. And we have picked, it sounded like they were picking 2 times. I think we want to narrow that down to just pick 1 time, because I'm guessing people don't want to spend 2 hours of meetings a day for one working group. And let's see. I'm watching people frantically type in the chat as well, so this is interesting. Other than getting a time set, we haven't spun up any meetings yet, and so that one is still a big TBD in the work there. And then from the artifact working group, I don't know if anybody else here is familiar with the artifact working group. They are over on the Kubernetes application SIG, I believe, under that section, where they are looking at different problems that people that have more generic artifact repositories are facing, and looking at how much does OCI play into that versus any of the other artifact repos, NPM, pip, Debian package repos, anywhere you can store packages out there. They're looking at what needs they each have, and then how they find some kind of commonality between there. Might turn into some request up to OCI. Some of the stuff they're looking at is maybe a generic search API. So you can search a registry for multiple repositories and have some method to do that. They've also been talking about how when they do a tag listing, that's not enough data for them. They want to know within all those tags, which of these tags are pointing to Helm charts. And within the Helm chart, maybe some more metadata about what's in that Helm chart itself so that they don't have to do a pull on every one of the manifest. So there's some different requests that might be coming out of that group at some point in the future. And I think that's the quick rundown of a whole bunch of working groups. I've left one link in there to a reverse working group that is in draft state. I think people have been talking about that more this year, but I have not jumped into that, trying to take it out of draft state because I feel like we got enough working groups at once right now. That's too much of me talking. I see a lot of people typing. Who wants to jump in and interject from any of that discussion there? Y'all are quiet. Okay, are we going to start jumping right into milestones? Do we want to get to the meat of the discussion? I'm going to feel really bad if you tell me my mic was on mute that whole time.
No, you're good. We're trying to figure out where people are typing and wondering how to proceed effectively.
It's really embarrassing with after like 15 minutes of a monologue, someone's like, oh, by the way, you were on mute.
No, you were there. You were
Image spec, I think, is pretty good. There's not a whole lot going on over there. We've got some RFCs out. We've got a request to go ahead and cut that one. I think the only reason not to cut that one is just because it's so interdependent with what's going on in distribution spec, and we've got some hairball issues over there. So I'm hesitant to cut a GA on image spec before distribution spec gets to some kind of settled state. So I think a lot of the work today is going to be over on distribution spec unless people want to pull us in any other different direction.
It's also not a blocker, but I would say if there is time today to discuss, it might be good to look at the annotation issue that Akihiro brought up. This is something where ostensibly, according to the conversion process described in the image spec, all annotations, and this is something that has been somewhat overlooked because no implementation does this, but all annotations must be copied to labels. And this is, problematic, or sorry, all labels must be copied to annotations rather. And this is problematic in a world where Kubernetes has, and not just Kubernetes, but like I would say like the whole cloud native ecosystem, primarily the kubelet, but other things use labels to overload the meaning of a particular container or change behavior, or even potentially cause a hook to be run. Arbitrary code execution is possible with many of the labels that are interpreted by things lower down the stack. And so it's mostly been Akihiro and Alexa, Cypher going back and forth on what the way to mitigate it is and whether or not it's even desirable to preserve that behavior, given that no implementation outside of, I think, Podman has really upheld that promise. But yeah, I mean, I think it could just use more eyeballs. Like we've discussed it a fair bit on the Moby side, and we don't plan on changing our behavior, but there's not been a lot of engagement from runtime spec maintainers, and ideally there would be more.
So in the runtime spec, I opened PR 1205. I sent a link to the PR later. But so I'm proposing the list of unsafe annotations, so that runtime will export a list of the prefixes or insecure annotations like org.systemd.property.exec statically, which may result in arbitrary code execution. High-level runtimes such as Contradi and Cryo may detect such insecure annotations and avoid propagating such image labels to runtime annotations. Yeah, I will send that link.
I don't see where people are putting things, so I put it in the Zoom chat just in case people are.
Yeah, he's also got it over in the general HackMD as well for anybody that's following there.
Given that we're at Kubernetes, at what point in the stack do you expect the labels to get copied?
That's the talking stick.
To it? At what point in the stack do you expect the labels to get copied to the annotations? And the reason I'm asking that is for processing reasons, right? Or are these labels expected to be processed by the container runtime at request?
In terms of Kubernetes, it definitionally has to happen at CRI because CRI is what contains both an image and a runtime bundle. Like CRI is the thing that implements CRI is the thing that has knowledge of both of those. After you go past the CRI layer, entropy occurs, right? There's been a conversion and there's no way to determine the image from which that config, the full data of the image from which that config bundle was derived.
Yeah, and I believe that's fine. That's fair for us to pass them over. The question is more of a, do you expect the CRI runtimes to do anything besides pass them over to run C and other people that are processing the hooks? In other words, today we only work with annotations as far as using annotations as a tool for kubelet to ask us to do some prototype type functionality, or taking a pod specification annotation and processing that in the container runtime interface. We do it on the annotations, so we know about. If we don't know about it, we just pass it through.
Right. So that's Akihira's proposal is we try to maintain an accurate list of labels that should not be copied to annotations, and otherwise it's unknown.
So my proposal is to support both accurate annotations and also the prefixes. So in the case of systemd properties, there's a bunch of insecure properties like ORZ systemd property, exec cert pre, and also a bunch of ORZ systemd property blah blah blah. So the idea is to just specify the common prefix, which is ORZ systemd property, because all these properties can be insecure. So the runtimes do not need to maintain the list of the accurate annotations.
Well, not in the spec, but and sorry, I should have said annotations as well as prefixes, but I mean presumably each well, let's call it high level runtime that implements image conversion would have to maintain its own internal list of known problematic prefixes, right?
So low-level runtimes such as runc have to maintain the list of the insecure annotation prefixes, and runc repos such annotations via runc features command to contrd and cryo. So contrd and cryo do not need to have any list. Does that answer your question?
Okay, I see. I got it inverted. So the idea is that each low-level runtime, so runc, crun, etc., would maintain their own deny list, and then it would be discoverable by higher-level runtimes to determine why labels were not passed through.
Yeah, right.
Trying to get the appropriate amount of dead air here. Although
Yeah, it might just be that there's not enough interest, but the thing I wanted to float just to see what people's immediate reactions are is given that no widely used implementation, I double checked Podman does not do this today. given that no widely used implementation actually currently implements this behavior described, an alternate approach could be prefixing converted annotations as they are converted to labels. You know, it would anything could be like org open containers converted or anything like that. Are there any thoughts just on the prefixing approach as opposed to trying to maintain a list of known problematic, right? Because we can surface implementations that Kata containers, gvisor, systemd, there's a couple implementations that do change behavior on labels, and we can try and enumerate those, but it does feel like it's going to be a bit like the seccomp profiles, poorly understood and manually maintained between repositories. So I do wonder if prefixing would allow for discovery of labels that were or annotations that were converted from labels without the security concerns, since those labels can have significant meaning.
Alternative approach maybe to have allow list like yeah, or maybe just modify the image spec to avoid propagating labels to runtime annotations maybe, but that might be technically a breaking change to the image spec.
I'm going to put a request in for the next one of these, Amy, that we need a coffee table in the room.
You are your own coffee table. What's wrong with you? Realistically, you all seem to be. Go ahead, Phil.
Beach. What am I being asked for? I missed that.
All right. Is it time to jump in a distribution spec? Is that what everybody's here for? We've got a milestone distribution spec with, I think, more than 6 different things. How many? 9 different opens on this thing. Should I go ahead and move some tabs so I can share and then we can all chat? Okay. I shall share. And if looking at a big screen like this is too boring, feel free to stop me at any time. Yeah, we've got a handful of different issues in here that would be good to burn down. And then we've also got some of the stuff in here that has been I would say a perma blocker for us. And so between trying to burn down some of the issues in there and working on, I was stalling so I could copy my tab over here, the perma blocker, up here, we've got plenty of content for the rest of the day. Do folks have a preference of the order that we go in?
Why? But the red, okay, that's fair enough. All right, Brandon, here. All right, Brandon, let's burn down the ones that we agree on and then get to the disagreement and then burn that too.
All right. I feel like we can take a couple of these pretty quick here. Stuff like the parameters. I'm going to move a tab here. It's going to do some funny stuff, hopefully. Okay. Parameters that shouldn't be included with the content type. This was a big back and forth with us deciding what we should do. And the conclusion we came to was to say that when you pass a media type in the content type header, that you shouldn't include any extra parameters saying that it's like UTF format or any other kind of stuff in there. Is just the media type of what the manifest is. If you're a client and you see parameters on there, you should ignore it. And then hopefully between the two shoulds, people interoperate. Anybody that does something funny in there, one side or the other would hopefully clear it out. There is a lot of code out there that just takes content type as is and does a select on it, or select. And so it's looking for exact string matches. And so the more we can not break that code, the better, I feel like.
Brandon, do you have Slack on this computer? On your computer?
I do.
Great. Can you like start throwing these links into a thread I just opened, because some of us aren't on Zoom and it's hard to follow what's in the hack thing. Just so we can follow along what you're doing.
Yeah. Allow me to move some tabs around. Alrighty, so this is hopefully one of the easy ones here. I sure hope so. If this one's hard, we're in trouble. So yeah, the idea here is for interoperability, everybody should not have any parameters on there and handle it if they are there. So we don't have to have, we shouldn't expect to see those anywhere. We did add an extra link to the RFC on this one of what those are. So if you're confused about what on earth we are talking about, copy this. The extra content type is, you could say this is a text HTML content type, but then you can also pass on, hey, here's my car set. And if you start doing that sort of stuff, there are a lot of things that say, hey, this is an OCI image manifest. But now there's a semicolon and an extra character set, maybe some other data in there. And if you do that, that's going to break a lot of code that's out there, even though it's allowed in the RFCs. And so we just are clarifying on our side, please don't do that. And from the client side, please be ready in case someone does that.
So I'm going to propose, so we have myself, Derek, and Mike in the room. So if these are your PRs and we all have nothing, like me and Derek already green checked it. If none of us like have anything to say about this, I think we just click the button and move on.
I'm ready to click the button. Any objections?
Mike? Damn it.
I can't hear the side conversation, so you have to fill me in.
Mike has a lot of feedback for you.
Okay. I see 3 approves on this one. I'm going to go ahead and merge on it unless someone shouts really, really quick. Too late.
Zip it.
All right. 1 burn down. Okay.
Thank you.
Easy
Next.
ones first. All right. Fix the discovery teardown. There is some stuff in the teardown of this. Did he fix some of my request? He did not. We're going to move forward on
Put
this
it in
one.
Slack. Put it in Slack.
We'll drop it in Slack, but this is not ready for merging yet. I've got a change request on it. And
it does
thank you,
look like
Michael.
maintainer carry is enabled. So if somebody really wanted to work on it right now, they could. If that's
yeah.
If you wanted to amend somebody's PR.
This, I need to just ping Wayne on it on the side and be like, hey, I know you want to knock this stuff out. So I think the quick DM will get that one settled pretty quickly. So I will work up action on that one. I was hoping to catch him some other time and knock that out. Okay, so that's 2 of them there. Conformance test needs to pull up annotations. That's a to-do. Those are issues. All right, we fixed the one easy one in there. So there is at least one more conformance test that I'd like to write at some point, which is to pull up some of the annotations and make sure that actually works on registries in the reverse API. Let's see. Then we're to the really complicated one. There is a few other conformancy things that people want to deal with. Let's see. Subject without artifact type.
I also
That
wouldn't
one.
be opposed to what Bjorn was suggesting, that we just make the change and see if it passes CI, if it's easy to do for the conformance.
On the teardown?
Or any of them, really. I mean, if we think it's easy enough to do in a minute,
I think
and
this one,
just
I'm
like
just
let
gonna,
CI run and then move on.
yeah, I think Wayne, I would probably just go back and forth on this one and clear it out. I wouldn't be surprised if he just doesn't see that I'd comment on it, doesn't know that it's waiting on him.
Yeah, I think Brandon was saying that he doesn't think there's a need for a carry. It's probably just a Slack message to
Okay.
look at
Yeah. And some of the other ones actually require writing a little bit of code, not a lot of code, but a little bit of code. So I won't bore the room with that. Didn't we already do this? Or this is the link header, isn't it? So we've got the absent header, but we want the link header. So we've got half of it done. But we still need the other half. That's why this one's sitting open. Okay. A few other things that need PRs. So open issues, code not written yet. And then we're to the one that I think everybody was built up and waiting on here. Not this one. I'm not sure what's happening there.
that one is your pathological example, Brandon, of an index that has a subject. So in this graph, it's a index that only uses the subject to refer to an image instead of a regular descriptor, but it is kind of your straw man example that we've never really examined closely, whether or not it's worth ruling on whether or not it should be considered valid.
I think this probably should be valid just because it doesn't have an artifact type, but I think the conclusion we finally came out with was that image spec needed to loosen their definition on its side. In fact, that has been done over there, apparently. This was proposed, and we probably
I think when you
merged
looked at this and said, didn't we already do this? Because this was the image spec side.
it. Yeah. Yeah, and so it was making it optional in the refers API. We're jumping around here. And this does have the milestone on it. We went back and forth on this. Yeah, I think the question was in the refers response, we won't have an artifact type, and that's the problem, is that there won't be an artifact type when you have one of these funky indexes. The index itself can have an artifact type, and if it has a subject, it probably should have an artifact type. But if it doesn't, we specified, I think somewhere we need to specify that the refers response makes that an optional field for that scenario.
That is to say, you don't need to include the artifact type extended field in the descriptor.
If it has some kind of artifact that doesn't have an artifact type or config media type. So just in this one scenario. All right. Have we tap danced around this long enough? I think we got the little stuff that we can do in the time we've got before jumping to the big stuff. Derek, should I pass the mic to you since this is yours?
I feel like I don't have anything left to say on it. I'd rather get other people's take, unless you want me to go back through. Let's see, what was my last state of position around it? I think the last thing was the graph that I posted, 4 days ago. Last week we discussed some stuff in the Thursday chat, and there was a request for more visuals around it. So I tried to put together 2 charts that kind of show the different data models. One's kind of the classic data model from 1.0 with with refers involved, and the second just being kind of what the data model is in the current language, or at least the data model that's enforcing. My statement's pretty simple, that both are valid data models, and if the language doesn't support it, then it's a breaking change and it blocks the release. You want me to
Others in the room
describe them more? Or we can.
I was going to ask if others in the room need any more of a catch up on this. I know that you and I have gone back and forth on this so much that we're excessively familiar with all these details here, but other people in the room may not be.
I'll just be honest that I've been pretty much out. And my posting of the RC today was just because it was like throwing something at the wall, but I don't have the full context. So what is the biggest what is the biggest issue with not just keeping it how it is?
The data model or the language?
Either.
What happened was there was a change in the language of the specification that introduced a must language, and the must language actually breaks one of the fundamental, prescripts for OCI, which is our APIs will not break backwards compatibility with the prior API. The original implementation of 1.0 for the distribution specification was supposed to meet the Docker API, which was donated to OCI, right? So when we wrote the 1.0 specifications, we were careful in describing it, or maybe not enough, we weren't careful enough. But one of the fundamental precepts of this was this Merkle diagram, right? You could use Merkle storage for the container images, and it's all the layers, right? And there would not be a standalone image part that broke that Merkle diagram, right? It's a part of Docker's data store, and not just Docker, other implementations of the registry, the registry now have picked this up. For example, IBM Cloud ICR is also requiring this Merkle nature, for the data. Can we store other things in the registry? Yes. But that would be a standalone Merkle diagram. And now we have artifacts that are referring to an image, and they're out of band, if you will, with the Merkle diagram for the image index or the image manifest that was pushed. Now, we did modify and we did approve the PR that made that must language that required a registry to be able to store one of these artifacts without having the image there. Okay. And that's was probably okay from a certain point of view on the client side, but from the registry side, I don't think it is. It's not appropriate. We'd like to modify the language, or when I say we, I mean I personally would like to modify the language back to its original, so that we have a more of a, if you're going to put a must there, it would be a must either support the 1.0 Merkle tree standard, where you would push the artifacts, afterwards, or within the tree itself, so you could refer to it from an index, for example,
So
or some other pattern.
Okay. For as far as like being the backwards compatibility, so when we were doing the reference types group, we have the whole sort of fallback thing. Does that not count as, so like, let's say a registry rejects this type of thing, like because the object doesn't exist, could we still do that fallback behavior? Does that not satisfy like being backwards compatible? Or
the issue is around whether or not the subject itself is a known field, because if you're a 1.0 registry today and you don't look at any of the unknown fields, then it works. But as soon as we release the image spec 1.1, it is no longer an unknown field. So from a registry perspective that wants to understand a subject and interpret it, it would make sense to treat that subject just as it would treat any other hash that it sees and validate it before it puts it in its data store. So with the language as it's written today, or say if you are ignoring subjects, then there's no link in between, like even in the compatibility mode between the subject and the actual.
Is it like
data.
chicken and egg? Because if you're treating subject as a known field, then you'd also be like, I would assume, implementing the spec as written, right? Or are you basically saying because of the requirement of the like Merkle tree thing on the back end that's just not going to work for certain people?
Well, I would say it's not necessarily chicken and an egg. I mean, it's one direction. I mean, it's as soon as you understand what this manifest is in the subject, it makes sense that you're going to validate everything underneath it. So it's more just mathematically how you would handle it. Like, this is a subject that's known, that you're going to validate the hash just as you would validate any other content. And the way registries end up using that is they take that strong link of, I validated this hash, now I'm going to add it to my as a reference pointer internally, and it will only add those reference pointers when that data has been validated, which makes sense from a lot of perspectives of keeping the data consistent, keeping it secure. There's no way to just arbitrarily create those links between the two because it's validated. But in terms of like the different options of hey, I'm a registry that's distribution 1.0, but now I'm trying to support image spec 1.1. I don't think that there's anything stopping that from happening just because of the way 1.0 is written. It's up to the registry to make that decision.
So can you clarify something? Aren't you now asserting that value must be mathematically validated? Let me a thought experiment. If the subject value, so you have a manifest that has a subject value and it points to another manifest, right? Because we had talked about that. Conceptually, it's like a pointer. So if we had hand waved something that allowed you to use arbitrary strings that weren't actually digests of a manifest that we refer to, but some aliased string, my cat pick, Brandon loves cat pick. So something like that, would we have this problem, right? Is it that are we kind of over rotating on the fact that the value set in the subject field is a digest?
I mean, I think if you did that, then you're kind of explicitly changing the data model, and that probably would have been rejected earlier on, I would say, by some of the maintainers. But
why? This what I'm asking. Why are we asserting that the value set in subject, which is, I mean,
because the image digest is immutable.
Yeah, from a perspective of you cannot create a image, the subject manifest before.
Sorry, what were you saying there?
Oh, I'm just saying you cannot actually create the subject manifest before that other manifest exists. From an existence perspective, it must exist first. So
correct.
So the fact that the registry itself would be enforcing that same distinction. You're right. If it's an arbitrary string, then that doesn't come into play. But then it's a whole nother basket of problems of now we've just recreated something else essentially, or created some.
Well, sure. I mean, it would be sort of like foreign layers, right? Foreign layers, not a digest, it's a URL, right? So
yeah, it's a good example.
It's a good example, right? It's kind of an analog. But I think I'm still hung up on the conceptually how we viewed the subject field, right? This as a pointer, not as a hash value that's meant to be mathematically verified as part of a Merkle tree, but a value that is in the manifest of another object in the registry that is its own Merkle tree, right? And then there is a string there which I admit is a digest, right? It is a CHA 256 digest of a different manifest, but the use is not, it is, I would not say that it is present in that manifest for the purposes of validation. It is present in that manifest for the purposes of reference.
Yeah, and as I said, that's a perfectly valid data model to not treat that, to treat that as like a weak relationship.
Yeah.
Just one aside as a quick reminder, it's actually it's a descriptor. So it is a little more structured than a string. And that is, I think to Brandon's point, because we've discussed this, like what if it was just an arbitrary string with Brandon in the past? Because like being a descriptor and not just a digest comes with even more baggage, I would say, than if it was just a digest. But the flip side of that is like a descriptor is something that registries already understand quite well. I guess from the discussions I've had, like my perspective on why that field, like why a registry would want to interpret it as a strong binding is mostly because there are certain expectations for services that a registry may provide, from filtering to garbage collection. Is that something user facing? No, but there are reasons that a registry might want to understand inexpensively the relationships between the many different objects it stores, so that, for example, when one is deleted, it can walk that graph. There are various reasons that it's advantageous to a registry to understand those relationships, even if it was an arbitrary string. Like that, there's a lot of those concerns for the registry operator, where they would want to maintain that those relationships between objects would remain.
But when you think about garbage collection, when the registry is going to implement garbage collection, they're going to implement it similar to the way they handle garbage collection for layers, which is that you push the layer first, then you push the manifest that points to that layer. There is a time difference between the two, and so that layer can't exist before the manifest does exist. And similar for the refers to that manifest, if there was a time difference between when that refer was pushed before the image manifest itself was pushed, you should still be able to do garbage collection on that.
Well, this is where I don't want to get too far into it, and I want to cede the floor back to Phil myself. But I mean, because it's a separate graph design, Brandon. Like whereas one graph, then it's just another object stacked on top. And if there's, if the thing that it points to is deleted so that it's left dangling, maybe you want to clean that up too, which, is today what we do with indexes and images in a lot of cases. And there's the whole aside on like distribution technically allows sparse images when you set things up with a delete and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, that's like the philosophy of the data model, I would say, whether or not it is a separate graph of referrers that is loosely associated with the main registry graph that defines all other content, or whether it is just one graph and all objects are related to each other in the same way.
Yeah, I think the big question here is, does having a descriptor in a manifest automatically make it part of the same DAG? And
Yes.
Depending on who you ask, people have very strong opinions one way or another on that.
Mathematically,
if it is part of the
but
same DAG,
you don't have to store it like that. Yeah, I mean,
if
on
it-
the back end, it doesn't have to be.
Right. I think the benefits of it being more of a weak link and not necessarily validated with the way you would validate like a layer is there was a use case that we had that was pretty popular during the working group, which was using a repository just to store signatures. So you would access control that differently, and you would
This is where
not be able to have those images as part of the graph because you would want this repo to be separate.
Before we get too far into that, I just have to remind people that what we're discussing is, so the language that was accepted from the artifacts working group was should. That was later changed after merge into the main distribution spec as must. And so what we're discussing is actually not strong link versus weak link. It is strong link versus implementer's choice of link, just to be clear. So there is nothing in reverting the language that would preclude like the case of a referrers only repository or similar.
Yeah, and I don't think the language today bans any sort of sparse indexing or sparse manifests. That's more of an implementation detail, but maybe some others more familiar.
The language, it's like, if you can also see, I mean, it's still accurate with the exception of the artifact manifest and the PRs I linked. I can also just link to the line here. The language is may reject dangling references, just using it as the blanket term here, except for the case of subjects, in which case the registry must accept, even if it's dangling.
And really, I mean, there's a pattern here that I would like to protect, right? Which is, if I'm a bank and I want to push my images into my own repository, and I don't want a third party, right, artifact to be referring to my banking application, I would like to be able to reject that. So I would like the language to say should or may, one or the other. Not, I don't want to reject a third party storage registries, but if I am a banking repo owner, I don't want somebody else to be pushing an artifact onto my DAG. I really don't. That's why I'd like to see this language get put back to how it was before.
So allow it to be, everything be strongly validated
As an option,
as an option.
just as an option, not a must requirement.
I'm trying to figure out how this change would help you with that one, Mike, because if your image was already pushed, you would still be able to push artifacts that point to that image after the fact.
Just saying,
feel like-
being able to reject them in the language, but
Yeah, I feel like if you want the ability to reject a manifest push, that would probably be not quite OCI, but you could always make a registry that could reject any content you wanted to reject.
Well, we could update the index.
so that gets into kind of the secondary point of it. Tried to separate them because there's this data model thing, the weak versus strong data model. But then there's also kind of, I think what most of the conversation has been about, which is defining what a set of refers is, because that's the reason why the language was changed in the first place. It wasn't necessarily, or at least I don't think it was unintentionally, just to break the strong data model. I believe that the intent of it was around consistency of the set of refers, and that's, you know, I think that's where we do not have a good technical solution today, and I don't think must is a good technical solution for it either. If we just look at kind of the core issue of how do I know when I have a set, and just, oh, if the index is there, or if the subject exists, therefore you have like a complete set of something. So that's kind of what I was kind of getting at in some of my proposals, but it seemed like yeah, there was a disagreement even on this core part of like, are these both valid data models? And you know, I think that's what blocks, like that's kind of the blocking component, but then there's the other component, which is, well, how do we work together on the solution for the set issue, which is it's kind of a separate issue, I think. But
Yeah, I feel like the main issue for the group to decide is, are these a single DAG where you have a signature and the content of that signature is another image manifest somewhere? Or are these two separate and the subject is just kind of a weak reference? And
I don't know that we're ever going to agree on that, though.
Yeah.
Like, the thing is, like, if you say the weak data model versus a strong data model, there's two different camps with like completely two different implementations. So instead of arguing that point, why don't we argue what the incompatibility is between the two, which from my understanding is related to the definition of the set. But I don't know if we can agree to disagree on that point and then just move on to this a solution for that, or like, I don't know. I feel like we've been going back and forth on this for 3 months, and there's at no point has anybody changed their position in terms of like my data model is valid and yours isn't, or something like that.
I mean, taking the view that every descriptor inside of a manifest is automatically part of the DAG, that implies that you know every descriptor in the manifest, and that if someone adds a new descriptor to a new field you don't recognize yet, that
you do know every descriptor, because you can't get a digest if you don't.
You as a registry don't know the data model of every descriptor in a manifest if someone is adding new fields that you've never seen before. So if I add a new field called the Brandon descriptor,
that's kind of the whole point.
If I add a new field into my image manifest right now called the brand descriptor, no registry out there knows what it is, but every registry is, if they're implementing OCI, should ignore that field and just let it pass through without validating anything. Once we increment and bump the version from 1.0 to 1.1, now registries recognize the subject field. We're now saying that we're going to introduce a forward incompatibility issue where content that was able to be pushed to a registry is no longer able to be pushed just because of what the registry is doing on its validation. So I think there's a risk there. I think there's also a risk that I can see potential data models where you want to have content that's pushed to a registry that has descriptors in it, and you don't want those descriptors at all being pushed. We've done that before with the foreign layers. And I think I could see a scenario where maybe you have known malicious content. It's one of my trailing comments into this. If someone was to upload a manifest that said, here's a bunch of stuff that should be on a block list that the registry should not be allowed on upload because we just know there are a bunch of Bitcoin miners running on this stuff, and gave that data to the registry as its own new manifest type of some kind, there will be a bunch of descriptors in there where the registry doesn't want to have the data pushed. And so for us to say the data model is anytime there is a descriptor, it must be part of the DAG and you must upload that content. I think that we're going to see more scenarios like this where we want to have a little bit more flexibility in that.
Again, I think we are falling a little into the false dichotomy because it isn't one. I just want to gently remind again, it's not one data model versus the other data model. It's one data model versus allowing for subjectivity and diversity among registry implementations, which, is both for better and for worse, as Brandon is pointing out, where some content from a field that previously had no semantics now may have semantics that mean that, it cannot be, it is no longer valid content in a 1.1 world.
I agree that it is a must. We are saying must right now on the registry, and we're proposing to change that to a should or a may. If we change that language for a registry, then it changes the language for a client to be a must on the client side, where today the client may upload in either order. If we change it from the registry is allowed to reject it, then the client is now in a situation where for them to be portable across multiple registries, they must upload that image manifest before they upload the signature.
I disagree with that characterization because it kind of implies that if we declare something from a very high place, that the world will reshape itself in our image. And I don't think that's the case. It's certainly possible that, again, if we commit to the must language and go forward, both eyes wide open, it's certainly possible that implementations will conform over time, and or these concerns will be ameliorated by a future version of the spec. However, in the meantime, people are going to want to use real clients against real implementations. So in a world where picking on ECR, ACR, and Docker Hub, I heard Mike Brown mention ACR, which I was not previously aware of, also potentially enforced, and that might be incorrect. So correct me if I'm wrong. Point being, there are large, widely used implementations that do currently have the behavior of validating the subject. So as a client author, it's not like having the spec make things ostensibly simpler for you actually alleviates those real world concerns. You have a choice of either being incompatible with those registries and playing the finger pointing game. And then your users can decide who they believe
deserves to have the finger pointed at them, or you can implement the behavior anyway, and then you've written the same code you would write if the must was relaxed.
I think in some respects too, the client is kind of the only one that actually knows what it can do and what it should do. If the registry gets a new reference with a subject that it doesn't know about, it doesn't know if it's going to get that, 5 minutes later from another push. It doesn't know if it's going to get it next week. It doesn't know if it's never going to get it at all because it's just going to be a dangling thing that needs to exist forever. The client knows. The client knows whether or not it's going to ever exist. And so it's kind of from a concerns perspective. I think there's one thing that I'm kind of struggling with this is overall, the end goal is a good idea. But there's a lot of sort of unspecified behavior in how registry should handle some things. I mean, if you can upload something that doesn't exist, what do we do if it does exist and then you delete it later? Are we safe to delete it, or do we need to let it live around? Do we need to, you can no longer GC these things until they're manually removed? If it points to something in a different registry, can we just never clean it up until it's manually removed? Should we ping the other registry to see when it goes away and then we can remove it? I don't know. There's just some weird edge cases that just don't really seem covered yet.
So I think for anybody that hasn't been part of the conversations for the past 3 months, hopefully we caught you up. I get the feeling we're not going to come to a conclusion on this. And so one of the things I would like to look at is, at what point do we consider this that we can't come to a conclusion and that we need to find a way to time box this and cut this discussion off and move forward?
Hey, Brandon, sorry, I'm coming in backwards. I grabbed the mic after you started talking, so I apologize for going back. I wanted to kind of plus one everything that Jeff just said. That all made sense to me, and it sounded like I just nodded to all of it. I don't think that any of that was really in contention. But I think the end saying like, we have yet to work those out, or like they're not specified. Those all seem like implementation details to me, that as long as the specification allows for those implementation decisions to be made, we're fine as a specification. I think that's kind of what I think there. So I think that everything that you just laid out, Jeff, made complete sense. And to me, kind of further cements what I've been saying for a little while, which is, as long as the specification allows for implementers to make the right decisions and be compliant, and that we're all working toward portable standards, I'd be happy. So I don't know that what was just said equates to me that we won't be able to work this out. Like, it felt like a breakthrough kind of, and like to end with, I don't think we'll ever resolve this. Is honestly, I'm still stuck on what we've been talking about, where we're working a DAG backwards from the referring artifact. Without me really coming to the table on that, I don't know. I'm not sure. I was fine. I mean, I actually believe that I brought up an argument against the must language to begin with. I think that relaxing that seems fine, other than we to spin the spec again, but like, whatever. Like, I think if it's the right thing, it's the right thing. I think we're fairly aligned on dropping must, right? I mean, maybe we should just ask that, like, do people still feel that we should have must in that language right now? Like, is that a good thing to just kind of align on?
That's what we put up for a vote a while back, and it came back that more the people want to have the must language than want to change it.
Or more people just wanted the release to go out.
I will say that like I mean so like to Brandon's
good
point, like this is irreconcilable. I think that a decision has to be made. My hope originally, and like I'm the person who brought this to Derek's attention and led to him creating this issue. My intention was always that this appears to be something that had flown under the radar of both the full set of maintainers as well as implementers. And if we were going to commit to it, at least we would commit to it eyes wide open. So like, at least, you know, me, and I think this might go for, you know, other implementers as well. Like, if we decide to keep the must, I think life goes on, right? Like we've talked about the pros and cons. Like, will clients have to deal with fragmentation? Will the spec describe real behavior of this new API for all registry implementations that otherwise implement 1.1? No. However, I mean, as Brandon has observed many times, conformance has never been perfect for 1.0. And there are plenty of sharp edges, especially with the oldest implementations, Quay, Hub, ECR, that, you know, are foot guns if one just looks at the distribution spec and tries to implement a client just based on that. And that's before we even get into things that are completely outside the spec, like auth. All that being said, I mean, I think the issue that Derek, Brandon, and I wrote was a effort to try and move things forward and try and just come to a decision, any decision. I don't really care what, but let's unstick this during a lack of maintainer engagement. I will say that, like, at least given last week that we managed to get a decent number of the distribution spec maintainers to start digging into the issue. And even if we had to retread a lot of ground, I feel like it was forward progress, because the people who ultimately are needing to make the decision and live with the consequences on this, we're digging into the technical specifics of what people have been discussing. You know, where I'm going with this is, like, I would like to just say, like, if you want to time box it, like, make it a maintainer vote by a particular date. And I think that's better than just doing kind of like the straw poll of the community we're doing. Like, at least for me, I perceive that as because we're making a lack of forward progress. And ideally, if we have strong maintainer engagement, to me, it's just pick something and commit to it. And ideally, the people making that decision would be those who have been entrusted to be the custodians of this specification.
I want to make a comment really quick. So I am coming in here after many months of lack of engagement. But what I am seeing is we had an issue that it was like an existential crisis, and then a vote came out. And it seems like, why are we not, like, it seems like some of us won't agree on something, and then one thing gets voted on, and then now we're still talking about it. Whereas in the past, we've done votes on these big things and moved forward. Why is this different? But we had the other existential crisis, the artifact manifest thing. And we thought we would never get past that. And then we voted on it, and then we did it. So, I mean, it was massive. It was a massive.
Pass the mic.
Sorry. Yeah, the 999 revert only broke the direction that it was going. It did not break the 1.0 specification. As a matter of fact, the primary reason for the 999 revert was to not introduce something new that had to be supported to be able to get artifacts in. They preferred to augment and enhance the 1.0 specification.
Okay, okay. I guess what I'm saying is, whether or not this breaks backwards compatibility, I don't know that that's a clear. It seems clear to you and clear to people who want to take this out. I don't think it's clear. Otherwise, we would be done with this. And so this is, to me, having been working with this group for the last few years, we come to these points and there's no agreement. So we put a vote up and then we move on. No, we did. Josh, what I'm saying is there is a vote.
Means a maintainer vote.
Oh,
So to
not
your
just
direct
a-
point, Josh, like what I was trying to say is that it was something of a act of, I don't want to say desperation, but at least my perception as one of the people and the author of that issue is that we were trying to take the temperature in the room, especially when there was a lack of maintainer engagement and doing the best with what we had. I would suggest that if we put it to a maintainer vote, that is used as a very strong source of signal for the maintainers as they decide as spec maintainers what they think makes the most sense for the health of the specification going forward. What I'm also saying is that I think that since this is contentious, if we want to make it definitive and put it to rest and commit and move forward, the definitive way to solve that is just to put it to the maintainers. That was something of a nuclear option that I think Brandon didn't want to invoke at the time. But at the same time, now that we have maintainer engagement, at least to me, that's the most definitive way to make nobody, it will be a compromise. Nobody will be happy one way or the other. But at least then there is no there's no reservations at that point. There's no ambiguity. There's no, who is this person who created an issue that was supposed to be a binding vote for the whole spec?
Yeah,
with,
I mean,
minimal
here's
maintainer participation.
The truth is, and like, I don't know if this call is recorded, so don't quote me, but the truth is, like, you yourself and other people who are actually care about this issue, kind of, it's more important to get your opinion. Like, some of the people on this, I'm looking at the maintainers list, like, you're going to put this up to a vote and they're not going to know what's going on. Like, I don't know. I'm like Jimmy. I don't know if Jimmy's been on top of this or not, but like, it would end up being like someone pinging him like, hey, like, look at this thing. And he's like gonna have to page through like 50 comments of like, and then he's gonna have to piss someone off. The other votes we've done haven't been through the mailing list or official, and it's just been on GitHub, just like the one that I'm looking at. So I assume that this, having been not on the calls for a while, I assume that this was the vote. But like, we can do a maintainer vote. I just feel like it's gonna end up like this. I honestly don't. I honestly don't know the answer here. I'm just saying this approach has worked, not for the sake of getting what's right, but getting us past these things. And to be fair, like, I don't. You said people just want to release. Like, I'm a little bit on that side. I'm not like pretending that I'm not. I just think
I want to release too. I mean, that's the reason why I basically have re-engaged, because I want to get the release out. Otherwise,
Yeah, well,
I was pretty disengaged because I didn't care about, well, mostly because I wasn't really working on it at my previous role. But at the same time, like, I want the release out. That's why I've been bringing this up. That's why I've been trying, like, even if I just throw something out there and Brandon says, I hate it, this is worse than it, I don't care, because I'm just trying to throw something out there just so we can figure out the way forward. From my perspective, a breaking change is a blocker. And like me as a maintainer, like, I'm a -1 on any blocker. Like, unless you want to call it 2.0 or just like do a new spec or something, you can do that. Like, that's perfectly fine. Like, Artifact's spec was originally like a different spec. I'm not saying we do that. I'm just saying like that's where we're at from like those specific issues. Just the like, oh, I want to keep the must or the not must. I mean, that's almost too specific to even like understand like, well, what exactly are we voting on here? Are we voting on breaking something or not breaking something? The vote helped, I think, bring who was interested in what side from a temperature perspective. And I think, we can bring those to the maintainers if we want and say, hey, like, these are the folks who really, really want to get the release out. They don't care about whatever.
I'm just saying, it's like, what's that thing with the US elections, like the college,
like electoral college.
Yeah, electoral college. Like, this is like the popular vote. So like, are we going to go against that or not?
Well, that's actually an excellent analogy. So like to unpack a couple things there you talked about, Josh. I mean, the idea behind the informal non-binding vote, or let me go back. Maybe I am moving the goalposts a bit here and letting my own personal sentiments, as I was going through this with Brandon and Derek, right? Because the whole reason we have been so involved in this, and we have probably spent I want to say close to 40 hours on this over the last several months discussing this, like the three of us, has been because we want to see this release happen. And, like I said, even if it's not the outcome that I would consider to be better from a data model standpoint, I personally would like to see us make a decision and commit to it. Now, the reason, and again, maybe this is me moving the goalposts, but the informal vote is just that. They work when maintainers are not super personally invested and they need a source of signal as to what way as a maintainer they should vote. So like it is very analogous to the Electoral College in that they are ultimately the people making the decision, but they have this very strong source of signal on what the consensus seems to be. That being said, it is an informal process. And the only thing that is binding is maintainers. So like, what I'm trying to say is that like, I personally would not be upset. I would be even in favor might be a strong word, but at peace, or, certainly would feel positively about moving forward the must language as is, as the author of that issue.
So,
however, like I'm not the person you have to convince. It's your fellow maintainers essentially to convince them that this vote is more important than your own objections, if that makes sense. And this wasn't the situation we were in until, or I would say that like I didn't consider that to be as likely a thing to have to negotiate or think about. But we have seen in like the last week, there have been more maintainers engaged on this. And, that means that that means that people seem to be drawing their own opinions rather than just relying on the consensus of the crowd for better and for worse. And again, maybe we should just argue that like, look, we should put our personal reservations aside. This is the thing that has the most thumbs up on GitHub. So we should just shut up and do it. Like, again, like I said, that would be a satisfactory outcome to me, even if it's not my personal preference, because, I do want to see this thing finished.
So, really, really quick, Brandon. Yes, I 100% agree with everything you just said there. Given that specifically that first option of the do nothing has the most thumbs or whatever, as of this morning, like putting up an RC or putting up a release is the vote to me, because that's basically saying, do the maintainers then agree to, like, a vote would be in the form of a PR if there was a change. And so the no change is a release. And so Derek is saying no. And like, does that mean if we get green checks from everyone else, then that's that? Or is there like,
I mean, if we want to go that route, I tried to make it pretty clear before that I saw this as a blocking change. The data model, the actual language itself, as I said, that's just an implementation detail. Like I think there's technical solutions for this. We can go through what those technical solutions are, but the political aspect of it, I kind of want to put that aside because yeah, anybody can go, like I didn't link this issue to anybody or say, hey, come vote for my thing. I don't know if other people did. I don't know who voted for it and what their motivations are for voting for it. Like I don't know how involved they are in the spec. So from my perspective, yeah, I wanted to see who comes and votes and how they vote, and that's information that we can use as maintainers for deciding. But I'm still at I'm always going to be at a reject, unless we can solve this backwards compatibility, unless we want to change the versioning of it or something.
Well, yeah, not even from a political standpoint, but like from an OCI governance standpoint, is your rejecting of, or is a single maintainer rejecting a release? Yeah, is that what happened with that? Like, could that actually hold this up from, okay.
Pass the mic.
I thought it was a good exercise when he reverted 99 because it gave the other maintainers a chance to look at why he wanted to revert it. And once
so the four of us, the three of us and Brandon, we need to be at peace with the result of that vote.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Or there's no way we will.
We'll add manifest in our effect manifest that it's future release. That's fine. But that's another discussion. Here in this case, I think the rejection is over the must language, possibly adding a breaking change to the specification in 1.1, for me at least, right? And breaking changes in OCI are right now, currently, not supposed to be done. It's one of our 7 laws, if you will, for OCI. We don't introduce breaking changes.
Yeah, I'm still not convinced it's a breaking change. I don't know if that's like a totally objective. I mean, we can argue about it. I don't.
That's the discussion.
It depends on your data model.
Brandon, what do you think?
To me, it doesn't feel like a breaking change because the field wasn't in previous manifest. And once we add the field into there, we defined how people should use the field. And so it doesn't seem like this should be a breaking change to me. But again, I'm not someone that writes the registry code itself. Maybe there's something on their side that they just can't work around. The thing that you've said, Josh, that really resonated with me, though, was that we had the vote. And when we were putting the vote together, the question came, well, what's going to happen with this vote? And, you know, if the vote comes out and says that nobody's going to like it, Brandon, what are you going to do? And my response was, if everybody disagrees with me, I'll be quiet and move on. I don't have to hold the thing up. I was going to follow the will of whatever people came in and said there. And so that, I think, Josh, you and I are on the same page there. And so I have the same question of why we're still discussing this after the vote came out, because
I mean, Brandon,
I would have
you-
at
you
least
wanted
followed the
to
response there.
You asked for that vote. I never said that, like, I was okay with, like, if you can get enough people to thumbs up this issue, you know, therefore it's not a breaking change. Like, there's a, like, if we want to discuss, as I said, that's the political aspect of it. If we want to discuss the technical aspect of whether or not it's a breaking change, I understand from your perspective, you want that validation to see, hey, should I keep in this position or not? And I'm trying to have the conversation be, well, let's put the political thing aside and let's see if we can work out a technical solution to this so that mutes doesn't have to be winners and losers. Like, I really don't think this is a winners and losers thing. Everybody can get their data model. But I feel like one side is saying you must lose and the other side is saying, hey, no, I think we can both make it work. So that's my perspective. And then a vote is just basically asking for kind of a zero-sum vote of, like, my position, you know, is the correct one, yours is not. And however we word that vote, you know, is going to shape what exactly that vote is.
I mean, I think that's maybe a little more cynical. I think it's been observed that, you know, there's a lot. The easiest thing is to go forward with must, because it was adopted after accepting artifacts, but it has been in the spec language for not quite a year when the issue was open, but over a year now. And, you know, at the time, I mean, granted, the meeting was a bit underattended, but it was very innocuous and uncontroversial.
I think there are some people maybe who haven't been following along as closely, but the breaking change that we're talking about, could we maybe pivot and just for 5 or 10 minutes talk about what that is?
You want me to talk about it? I can talk about it. No, so it's, I mean, it's kind of what we discussed at the beginning. It's the 2 data models where when you're go to upload any manifest, during that manifest upload, you look to see all the descriptors and whether those descriptors exist. And as soon as, if you understand one of those descriptors, you're processing it just as you would any other descriptor in this case. So the breaking change is really when you use that descriptor in order to have a strong link between, I have this manifest and I have all of these children objects that are underneath it. All of those children objects are validated through the Merkle tree language, or just validated as a Merkle tree. Everything is a sub-Merkle tree. Any descriptor you can consider as a root of some sub-Merkle tree in that case. Yeah, which is how a lot of registries work today.
But registries don't today validate a descriptor that is in the subject field of a manifest,
because it is an unknown field. But it's no longer an unknown field. It is a known field. So it's changing language to say say, oh, we added this new field and now you must treat it like this. Whereas like Brandon brought the point of like, oh, what about new fields that come up in the future? Well, some registries today rejects unknown fields, which is also can be done as well.
That,
so it
that
wouldn't
cannot be done according to OCI.
You can reject stuff that
Not according to
you-
OCI.
well,
From
according to
OCI,
what-
any unrecognized fields,
But let's-
you're supposed to ignore.
What's the breaking, what is, so today, if you push a manifest with a subject field and the registry ignores it, that's okay. Like before 1.1 and 1.0.
Yeah, but
And then if we, yeah, and then
yeah,
in
and you might get
1.1,
garbage collected or run into anything that the registry doesn't understand what it is. And it might just fall to the wayside essentially.
what, and so
Like there's no link, like ignoring it means that there is no link in the registry for it.
Correct.
Like it is just not handling refers at all.
And so in the specification,
That's why we had the fallback type.
in the specification, couldn't we say either that registries must validate the subject field, registries may validate the subject field, or registries must not validate the subject field? And all of those would just be, we're introducing new functionality to the registry. I don't understand what's breaking, unless we're going to say, because we're ignoring unknown fields today, we can never require a new field tomorrow. Is that what we're saying?
I'm not sure I follow.
What?
In the
What-
1.1 specification, there's an additional field that's been added to the distribution.
A subject field.
specification. Subject field.
Yeah.
In the distribution API, there's been modified language, not a year ago,
Uh-huh.
fairly recently, I guess. I don't remember, I haven't looked it up, Brandon, I don't know what the.
That
date
says
was.
registry must
Question.
allow
Right,
a subject field that references a missing manifest.
right.
And that,
That was should before.
sure.
Yeah,
But-
the current language in there says
But
that
there wasn't a subject field in 1.0. So what is breaking?
That's not necessarily true because the subject field was not defined by the
So
distribution.
so
spec.
it is what we're saying is
But it
because
was
we
but all
supported
language-
unknown fields in the past. No, like when we define a new field, we can't make it.
It's more that it's up to the registry to decide how it handles the manifests that
maybe
come in.
maybe to try and like I think summarize what the concern about it being breaking is, like it is a little bit of an obtuse breaking. I would say that it is that previously you could accept these uploads. Now you're expected to not only accept them, but interpret them according to the refers API and provide this reverse lookup mechanism. However, because of the mandate that you must use weak linking, this can be hard to retrofit to existing registry designs that were strongly aligned with the 1.0 data model. 1.1, as it is currently written, introduces a different data model that means that your registry may have to undergo significant revisions and or, just the, how would I put it? The assumptions that you have made and how you model the registry graph may not mesh well with 1.1 if weak linking is mandatory.
if it's difficult to implement the refers API, there's nothing saying that registries must implement the refers API. Clients can use the fallback scenario.
But what's the path forward in that? Anyone that has a data model that doesn't allow for this can never move past 1.0 anymore. We can never do anything. Do we adopt a half breaking 1.1 where it sort of looks like it isn't technically that, just to kind of make some things useful? I guess my question is, what's the path forward for those that can't do it for one technical reason or another?
For clients, we have never said that you're talking to a 1.1 registry. For clients, we have said, if you want to know if this works and exists, you need to look for these capabilities from the registry individually. And so we don't know or care that we're talking to a 1.2 partial registry. We just want to know, is the refers API available for us?
Does changing must to may make this not breaking? What's the question?
It makes it not
Yes.
breaking for those registries that feel it prescribes a particular implementation or data model. Yeah.
It makes it breaking to the clients that wanted to be able to push the content in advance. And so depending on which side you are, it breaks a different use case.
Okay, so I want to understand this correctly. The new subject field being added, and then us also saying you must allow anything that's in there if it's a valid descriptor right now. Well, the digest, as far as I understand it, the
Pass the mic.
digest doesn't need to exist in the registry. This is what we're arguing about.
It's the validation is still there, but it's a valid descriptor, except you don't return an error for missing content digest not present. You just accept it. Like that is the specific carve out.
Okay. The validation of the descriptors as it stands today, is there something in the spec in 1.0 saying you must validate it this way?
I think it says you may, and that's why when we started talking about sparse manifests, that was a special call out that some registries might be validating a lot of this stuff, and here's the error code if they are, but otherwise you can always
I just
push
think
content.
I actually disagree that it's backwardsly incompatible, because if you are starting to look at subjects, then you can take the whole thing as it is, right? Like the whole 1.1 of both specs. Otherwise, like, don't look at subject, use a different field. Does that make sense?
I mean, that goes back to another whole thing of like saying that if you're not 1.1, you can't implement refers at all. Like you must ignore the subject field.
Sorry, say it again.
Like, is that logic saying like you must ignore the subject field in 1.0?
If you're putting it in a tag as a hard link that's going to break other functionality, then yes. If you're not doing that,
I'm just saying, if it's important to be one, like, I think the problem is that clients that want to do these things with the sparse manifest want to be able to say, this registry is 1.1, I can do these things. And when we have registries not agreeing on whether or not I can do that thing, now you can't rely on that field to do that thing. So
I to the other registry, you can still push the artifact to the other registry that supports weak references and won't reject it.
but I want to be able to write a client that works with every registry that says it's OCI 1.1. So why can't, like, I'm not saying people should win and lose, right? I'm just saying, like, there's already registries today that aren't 1.0 compliant as it's written. So like, why does it even matter? Can we just like write, can we just release the spec?
To piggyback on that, you can push this content to any 1.0 registry today. And what we're saying is content that you could push to a 1.0 registry, they want to change the scenario and wording to say you can't push it to a 1.1 registry.
Say that again?
Yeah, I don't understand.
The content today, if I was to push the signature first today to a 1.0 registry, it doesn't know what the subject is, so it will accept that. And what we're
No, that's not
trying
true.
to change the wording to is to say that a 1.1 registry would reject content that a 1.0 registry would accept.
A 1.0 registry can support subject. There's nothing in the language and the distribution spec that says a 1.0 registry must ignore subject. That was my other point, that image spec and distribution spec are two different specs. You can be a distribution spec 1.0 that understands distribution spec 1.1.
You can, but when I'm looking at a 1.0 registry, I'm saying a registry that implements both distribution and image spec 1.0 releases, which is what's out there today.
Is there a distribution spec or can there be in the future a distribution spec 1.0 registry that supports image spec 1.1? Or vice versa? Is that the?
I mean, that's kind of what the fallback is pushing toward.
I guess my understanding was we were going to release the specs together and sort of expect that if a registry becomes a 1.1 distribution spec registry, it supports 1.1 image spec, and that I don't, you know,
Well,
for this change, the upgrade has to be.
I mean, if
hand in
it's
hand.
backwards incompatible, then yeah, but then we might as well just do a major version bump if that's the route we want to go, to say that these specs are completely incompatible with each other.
I'm not saying they're incompatible, but I would say that the changes we are making between the two specs are linked together.
Well, and it's I guess not a straw man. Like, to be clear, I don't think it's a super productive path, but certainly a thing that has been raised in argument several times has been, well, if distribution spec 1.1 doesn't work for you, why don't you just support image spec 1.1, support the referrers tag schema fallback, and kind of wash your hands of it, which I don't think is a super productive thing to encourage in the ecosystem, but it's definitely like, how would I put it? It is a thing that has been argued in previous discussions around this.
I'm not sure how, I feel bad if we're saying that's an unproductive, because I feel like that's giving us an out that we might need for various registries out there that say this is just too hard for us to implement. That's why we made the spec the way we did, knowing that it was going to take time for registries to upgrade.
Yeah, I guess some of the secondary points I was trying to make is that the data model change is unnecessary. Like, from like an distribution spec maintainer perspective, I'm looking at it, it's just not needed. Like, the must is in there to gloss over a problem in the design, really. And that's the design and like how sets are determined. And like the fallback from, like, I've had this perspective for a little while, but the fallback is almost a better implementation of that, because it's a strongly defined set of referrers. But
I just want to take a moment and say that the reference groups started in January of 2022. So it's almost January 2024.
it ended prematurely, I would say.
Agree to disagree.
I think we should give the working groups that advice that don't end the working group until the spec is out. Because now we're in a state where the distribution or the working group's gone away, and the maintainers have said, hey, there's some issues with this. And now who owns it? Essentially, is it the maintainers that now own it? Is it the working group that owns it? Like,
well, the working group
like,
went
how
away
do we go
after
about
we
that?
merged it into the respective projects.
I think it's a miracle that we got anything out of the working group. So I disagree with that sentiment. Like, if you were there, then getting people in that room to agree, let alone having maintainers being involved in it, was not easy. So I kind of see this as like, there's a different approach that we could take to this, but we're not of like, look, like this should have been brought up 2 years ago. And now you want to now say more about like all this. We're talking about the fallback, like this has been thought about and thought about and thought about.
I know, and I'll say that is just my opinion. Like, I think.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is all opinions. It's just like a time thing too. We started doing this 2 years ago. There might be some warts. Maybe it will never be perfect. But like, I'm starting to get burnt out, like, of being in this group, because it's just like, why do we not? I get the backwards compatibility thing. It's like very important, but we don't just like pull the trigger on things to the point of like a fault. And we're so scared that like we're going to break someone and we don't release new features.
I wouldn't say that's my concern.
What's that?
To Josh's point, I would say that I don't think we were ever going to discover the concerns that we have with this. If we hadn't been pushing back to registry saying, please verify that you can get a conformance on the 1.1 RC candidate and let us know if you have any concerns, because we were about to GA. And I don't know how we can make the working group push upstream repositories to go through and do tests on something that's coming out of a working group.
Are you agreeing or disagreeing with me? I am confused.
I am agreeing that we closed the working group when the working group should have been closed, and that I don't think we could have ever found the issues we're finding right now with the working group. This needed to be right before GA, and I don't know how we would get the working group to do that.
I mean, I think that is ultimately like ideally having maintainers who are well engaged and are well representing the ecosystem. I mean, is the only thing I can think of there. I'm just thinking of like avoiding another 999 scenario of like, ideally you don't want to accept anything from a working group. I would think that the maintainers would be opposed to releasing as is, you know, right then. If it's accepted with like, I don't know about that. We might have to go in circles around that a little bit. I mean, it has led to, I'm just picking an image spec here. Like it has led to the, if I had $1 for every time I answered, so how am I supposed to do artifacts now that they were removed from the OCI spec? Why did OCI do that? Like I would probably be able to buy myself a nice dinner.
I'd love to get the early maintainer feedback too. But the point that I've made a few times, and I feel bad I make it too many times, was that Derek was one of the approvers on the language in there right now that we're talking about.
Yeah, I've got to leave a little early. I have a customer meeting. I apologize. I just wanted to say, as part of the working group, we had, I think, 4 implementers. Like we all built it. So it's not like we did all this in a vacuum and then now we're like trying to build it and it fails. Like we had Zod, ECR, ECR, like we all built it. I mean, we've had this in ECR for a year and change. And you know, I'm just saying, I'm clarifying something that was said. That's all. I want to make it clear. Like we all built this while we.
Yeah. And that's really what I'm not trying to say.
Yeah, Michael just pointed out works fine with May. Like it really does. Like that's how we built it. There's no must in ECR. Just saying. All right, I do have to leave. I'm sorry, everybody. I'll catch up.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to imply otherwise. Like I don't have any silver bullets. Really, what I mean, it's the same thing as this. Like I think a lot of why this issue has been stalled has been a lack of maintainer engagement. Like going back to the earlier point about 483, like my hope is, and maybe to put it the other way, like, you know, I think it's presumptuous to assume that by creating an issue and asking people to vote on it, can preemptively bind maintainers to ultimately moving with the way that issue is discussed and what people thumbs up. Like, you know, at least in other projects I've been involved in, I would consider that to be, you know, it's no different from any other issue. But I hope that if we do just have to make a decision and live with it, which I suspect is kind of where we're at, people do use that as a source of signal. And, you know, I mean, like I keep on saying, like, is it my personal preference? No, but I would rather get this out sooner than later. And as long as we do it both eyes wide open, prepared to live with the consequences, I mean, which I think is kind of, you know, what Josh is espousing, maybe we have to fail forward. But I mean, ultimately, that's something that I could live with.
Yeah, I would say I would say the Docker perspective as well. Like ultimately, the vote will go where the vote goes. But there's also still, if this was a may instead of a must, there's still a ton of user value that can be extracted from refers. And so the whole you can't claim to support the refers API unless you do this must. Okay, but like if you had that in May, there's still a lot of value there. You can still store a lot of information there. You can still actually reference things. You can sort of get 95% of the spec there and kind of get 99% of the benefit. And are you technically 1.1 compliant? No, you're pretty close and get a lot of the benefit. Is that worth throwing away? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. It just seems like it's a good idea with an implementation that falls short. And now, given the time frame, don't have the willpower, the people, the time, the whatever to kind of maybe come up with a design that does meet all use cases and is flexible enough in the implementation to allow people to do what they need to do on the implementation side. This is one where the use cases are defined, but the current implementation of the spec doesn't really leave enough wiggle room for all registries to actually comply. So
has it been discussed in the last few months discovering the yes or no of this validation? Right? Like we're already, like clients are already supposed to hit refers or head refers to see if refers is supported. Have we discussed like if it is a may, like determining whether you can push a sparse manifest or not?
Nobody's proposed a feature detection mechanism. All we've discussed is revert to the previous state of should, if that's what you mean.
Yeah, it's a previous state of should kind of argument. And if we leave it's interesting going back to when this originally was put in, the question, one of the questions that was put out was, well, then once they push this new, it was a manifest at the time, right? We were going to push these artifact manifests at the time. But there was actually a discussion on, well, if I push an artifact manifest that has a refers to another manifest that doesn't exist in this registry, either now or because it's been removed, right? That registry can then garbage collect, okay, that artifact manifest. So actually, in this particular case, I guess we could make the argument that if we put a must push language or must allow the push language, that then, you know, at some point in the future, you know, 30 seconds from now or 3 hours from now, that registry could then remove that artifact because it doesn't fit in the DAG by, for example, you know, postponing the validation, right, Derek?
It's the same validation that they do today when they have layers uploaded before the manifest.
Right.
I guess kind of what Josh was saying. I mean, there was a reason why we added the must in the first place. I would like to go back and like, let's figure out what those problems were. You know, I feel like Brandon, you and I and Bjorn have discussed that at length, what those problems were and what, like, if we were to remove the must, I'm not trying to say like, let's remove the must and, you know, all your concerns, you know, to hell with them. Like, no, like I've been listening to them intently and trying to figure out, you know, like what is the way, what is the alternate solution rather than having to put that must in? Because I do think the must is a bit of a crutch and a sign of like a little bit of weakness on the spec to some degree that we have to have this strongly worded language to get around a use case that's really not related to image or content validation whatsoever.
Okay, so I hate to do it, but ideally they're going to come kick us out of the room. Ideally, I mean, okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Really, there's someone with a hook out the door right now.
So
probably for
final
the
thoughts.
best. All right. Well, I think we'll get to the bottom of this soon. Thanks, everyone.
It's a little 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but at least I felt very positively about the increased engagement because we've been discussing this, mostly me, Brandon, and Derek, for several months. But in the last couple of weeks, we've had people strongly engaged. So I think one way or another, it might not feel like it, but I think we are making progress for what that's worth.
And as always, a huge thank you to Amy for organizing these things, even when she couldn't be there.
All good. Hoping to see you all in Paris.
Get well soon, Amy.
Yeah, I agree. Get back. All right. Thank you all. Thank you all.
Everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
way easier.
Oh, yeah, I don't understand that. Blind pizza, please. Why does it keep saying that? It's gonna be too hard. If you have
There's a
sport
reason
team.
why I work on clients at Docker, not work on the registry.
Yep.
Not smart enough to work on the registry. When did you go to Docker?
Did all three of the Docker people all have different?
Probably. I started working with First API a year ago, and now I'm gonna have more from a container perspective, but also like August.
Secret move.
Where have you been?
Yeah. I had a baby and I've been sleeping.
How was your vacation?
Yeah. How old your baby now? 3 months. Wow. And that's the exact amount of time that I. And you didn't even care to congratulate me.
Thank you.
Congrats on being back. What's happening?
I'm logged out.
Ooh, whoa.
All right. I'm surprised you're here. I've been 3 months. No, this is literally my second day back.
You live here though, you said.
I live in Chicago.
Your first day back.
Yeah, I'm
Send
back.
out an RC.
I'm a. Yeah. I almost messaged Josh first, but I was on the fleet. I got notifications, I couldn't actually like. Type anything.
I will.
I was like, did they do that on purpose?
No.
That's fine. I'm just throwing stuff at the wall. I just came back after 3 months.
Here are two clients. I think Paris was too, so.
Yeah. We need to stay around. Right. I feel optimistic, but. Yeah. A minor release every 10 years.
Those will be. You want me to, I start like moving the screen at least? Yeah. Wait, we're not using the same screen that we have? Yeah. Saw that, yeah. So I was, but Patrick. They got slow speaker. Screen and a little stage. We're gonna put the screen on there. Yeah, and then fall the stage. Alright, but so now needs to. Yeah. Page 9. Yeah. So the lines, I mean, they actually stay. They should be able to stay. I mean, it's just that there's like we run down to the middle. You know that over there, like, whoop. Kind of like this morning. Like put the screen way here. Yeah, like just look like this out at the screen. Yeah. Oh yeah, go like that. No, I don't know if they did it this morning. Because it looks like on the diagram, taking rectangle table on the left staying, and then the one that's on the right. I don't see. Yeah. Table were set every, and I was going to. Yeah, that's obviously, we'll just share that. One like this. You wanna move it now and screen? We can, I just, that needs to get out of the way. Well, I was thinking we could come to the edge right. Oh, yeah? Yeah. Okay, let's do it. Just going to double, make sure that, we can kind of, just put it in place and have, these sessions open at? You know, kind of go by. Yeah. Is your room done? No. Right. You're not going to 6? Somebody, you good? Yeah. No, you're good, you're good. Say you're good. How's everything going in? Good? Okay. Yeah. All right. That's cool. You want anything? Here. Yeah, you're welcome. Just because they're gonna pan I'm going to come down there. Sign off. See you tomorrow. Yeah. Yeah. So it's gonna be 12 feet, so this is gonna be, what's that, is that 6 feet? Is that 8 feet? Yeah, 4, 8. Big, we need another 4. Well, there's gonna be like, it's gonna be built up, it's gonna be, there's 6 chairs that are going on. Yeah, you know what, as far as power, I think we may have to, rip it up. Yeah, okay, cool. I imagine the podium is gonna go like right here. Yeah. I hope we get enough cable. Alright, I gotta go do run. Yeah. Yeah, so I just wanna go. Not all of them, so 6, yeah. Yeah. Okay. We make this work. So this is what we've done so far. Good, how are you? Good. Guys, so. Yeah, yeah. What we're gonna do? We're gonna keep.